All the games from round 3 of the Sinquefield Cup were drawn. There were some tense games, but the players seemed to be very well matched. So, for example, Hikaru Nakamura tried for 104 moves to beat Sergei Karyakin, but Karyakin defended accurately and managed to draw in the end. And Carlsen against Caruana. Well, Caruana had to defend a slightly unpleasant endgame, but did it without too much drama. So it seems to me in these games the balance wasn't seriously upset. So I'd rather not look at one of those games from round 3. And I'm going back to round 2, and I'd like to look at the game between Anish Giri and Levon Aronian. Because I think there was a moment there that was passed over by the commentators, and I think Anish Giri missed a win in this endgame. So we joined the game after 47 moves, so we're actually right near the end of the game. Anish had managed to squeeze out some advantage in this endgame, and done very well to do so actually. And here he played pawn to b7, but after a few more moves the players agreed to a draw. He couldn't make any progress from that position actually. The rook was in the perfect position behind the pawn. But here, instead of b7, I think it was possible to win with knight f6. I've been studying this position for some time now, and I find it absolutely fascinating. There are some beautiful little tricks in this endgame. So let's take a look at this. So obviously knight f6 check forces an exchange of knights. So we reach a rook and pawn endgame. Now, black's problem here is that the king is severely restricted. It can step up the board, but that would be inadvisable because of rook h8 mate. So what should black do here? Well, first of all, let's see what happens if black simply waits. So, for example, rook b4. Now, white's idea is just to bring the king across the board. Okay, black makes some random checks. I mean, this is definitely not the best defense, but let me just show what happens. So in this case, b7, and now this is a winning position for white. Basically, white is going to bring the king over to hit the rook, force the king forward, and take this pawn, and that will be a winning position. So let's just see how this happens. It's possible to advance the pawn, but actually it doesn't make any difference here. Basically, we're going to just hit the rook. And if the pawn advances, now the position is Zugzwang. Black's king can't move. The rook has to stay behind the b pawn, otherwise the rook moves away. So basically, black loses this pawn. And again, the king comes across, will force its way through. Basically, we'll get down to e7 and take this pawn, winning position. Okay, let's just see another version of this. If the rook comes back, king comes up the board. Slowly, the king just forces its way up the board, attacks the e-pawn, and now the position again is Zugzwang. White wins that pawn and will come through to d6 and e7 and wins the f-pawn. Black can only delay it. That's the basic idea. So black has to play more actively, otherwise white is just winning this position. Alright, so let's see what happens if e4. So this is more testing, but I believe white is winning. So first of all, white's king has to come across. King e4, and now we want to try and collect this pawn. So black makes the best of it, gives the pawn. Once again, we can see that if black just protects this pawn, then b7 is going to win, and it'll be just like the other variation. So in this case, black swings the rook across and at least grabs the f-pawn. Now, it's possible for white to go wrong straight away in this position. If the pawn advances to b7, then rook b6 is a draw straight away. In this case, without the pawn on f6, well, white can make no progress at all. If the king comes across to support the c-pawn, the rook will just check the king away from behind, and yeah, no progress there. Right, so white has to take care here. So instead of advancing that pawn, we bring the king across to support the pawn on b6. The reason this is a win for white is because actually, well, two reasons. The king can support the b pawn, and at some point black is going to have to give up that rook for the b pawn. And actually, from the b file, the king is relatively close to coming back across to stop those pawns. And the other reason this is a win for white is that actually black's king is in a really poor position, and it's very difficult to get quick activity using the pawns on the king side. Okay, let's see how this works in practice. So for example, let's send the rook down the board and put the rook behind the pawn. Now again, black's problem is the king actually. If the king were somehow advanced and could support the pawns, it's a different story. But it takes some time for the king to come up the board. It's possible just to check on h8 again. It's not mate this time. But actually a good move is rook a4. So the rook defends, but at the same time actually takes on a really active role, coming to b4, and also can shield the king from c4 as well. For example, and rook b4, check. Okay, the king comes here, so the threat is just to advance that pawn, so the rook goes back. And then king c6. Okay, black desperately needs to find counterplay on the king side with the pawns, but actually it's just way too slow. Let's just see this. So we're going to win the rook. Doesn't really matter whether you take straight away or move the rook across. Let's just see how this works. So queen, and now the king is just too close, and this pawn is going to drop very, very soon. Okay, what else we got? So this is the start of this endgame with white's king on d4. What did I try last time? Oh yeah, let's go rook f1 instead. Straight away. Did we have this before, or did I try rook f5? No. Let's try. I tried that before. Let's go rook f5 this time. So once again, b7 will be a draw. So we need to shuffle the king across first. So king c4. And now we're ready to advance the b pawn. So the rook goes down as before. Well, this really isn't very different from the position we had before, actually. Let's just see. In this case, the king gets checked in front of the pawn, which you might think will slow things down, but actually doesn't make much odds. Okay, in this time we'll check from behind. And now f5, king comes out. And in this case, again, the king comes across, and this is just much too strong for black. Okay, let's try something else. King g7. So we're at the start of this endgame after king d4. So king g7, does this make a difference? Not really. where you can see that, I mean, basically this is the same as, roughly the same as before. You know, black's king and kingside counterplay simply aren't developed enough here. Okay, let's go back to the starting position, because actually there are a couple of defences that need looking at. So one is, what happens if black tries to solve the problem of the king and activates with g5? Now this is a bit desperate, and in fact it does lose immediately, almost immediately. First of all, we'll take it, and in this case we can actually play b7. So if king takes pawn, then of course we have rook check and b8. And if king f5, trying to activate, then g6 is a very nice move, and that will win the game. So once again, if king takes, then we have rook check, and if pawn takes, then the pawn marches on. So the move g5 simply isn't good enough, basically. Okay, let's go back to this position. Now there is one last defense which is very tricky. Okay, rook, sorry, not that one, rook b2, that's the one I was thinking of. And if king g3, rook b4, now this is very tricky. So how does white deal with this? Well, in this case, it's a mistake to play b7. Because after rook b6, this is very annoying. White's king can't pass on the f-file because black picks up the pawn with check and then swings back, and that is a draw. So after rook b6, actually king f3 is impossible. There's nothing that white can do here. You can play king here. But actually in this position, well, it's possible to play, well, just e4 actually. And if king f4, we can take with check, very important, and then rook back behind the pawn, and that's a draw. So b7 would be a mistake. Okay, what else have we got? Okay, king f3. Again, we can't pass, because after this check, then we can take this pawn. Crucial. Well, white can still try to win this one, but I don't believe it's good enough. But there is a much stronger move after rook b2. So we play king g3, and after rook b4, here, king g2. That's the key move. And this puts black into Zugzwang again. So, first of all, we know that the king can't move. If king h6, then rook h8. So, by process of elimination, it's got to be one of these moves. Well, if g5, we know that that's going to be winning for white after taking. So, what about e4? Well, in this case, we can actually cross the f-file because the rook check to f4 has been blocked, and we're going to come across, we're going to play b7, king e3 and win that pawn as we've seen before. So pawn to e4 isn't good enough. Okay, there's a tricky move. What about rook g4 check? So we know that king f3 will run into rook f4, and that pawn will be taken. So we don't want that. So we come to h3, we come back again. And now, after the rook comes here, we play king g3. So this is triangulation. So now it's black's move instead of white, and black doesn't have decent moves here. In fact, we've had this position before at the start. This is Zugzwang. the defensive formation has to be broken and white will win. Yeah, so if the rook comes down, then we cross the f-file. That's the crucial thing, and we reach the position that we had before, basically. So yeah, that's a little subtlety right at the end. So there we go. I think Anish missed a win there. If you think I've overlooked something, then do let me know. I could well be wrong, but I believe that position is a win for white. Remember, if you want to look at the other games that I've recorded from the Sinquefield Cup so far, then do check out the Sinquefield Cup playlist. You'll find it in the video description down there. And, well, there's all kinds of things you'll see in that list. Lots of playlists from all the players, plenty of other stuff as well. And, of course, remember, if you're not a subscriber, then now is the time. Click on the subscribe button. It's free, and you get instant notification for when I post a new video. Thanks for watching.